All right, so King Henry VIII. Right. I mean, the first thing that pops into your head is probably wives. Lots of wives. 6 to be exact. Like, it's almost a cliche at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that gets stuck in your head from history class, like
Mhm.
Henry VIII equals 6 wives.
Right. But today, what we're really going to do is dig a little deeper into what was really going on with those marriages. Like, forget just names and dates and all that. What about the actual drama, the juicy stuff, the stories that don't always make it into the textbooks?
Exactly. And what your sources really emphasize is that we're not talking about some soap opera here. These marriages were like totally intertwined with the politics and religion of the time. It was serious business.
So, our mission today is to really get a sense of how these women and what happened to them actually changed England. Like, we're zooming in on the turning points, those little details that make it all come alive.
And what's so fascinating is how much pressure was on a king back then, especially for a newer dynasty like the Tudors. They had to make sure the family line continued. And Henry, he was totally obsessed with having a son to inherit the throne.
I mean, that's got to create some tension, right? Like, this one thing he wants becomes this driving force behind all the chaos that's about to go down.
You got it. The need for a male heir was like the dark cloud hanging over everything.
Mhm.
It's a theme we'll see play out again and again as we go through each marriage.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Catherine of Aragon. Now, she wasn't just some random noblewoman. She was Spanish royalty. Like, her family had serious power.
Absolutely. And her connection to England actually starts before Henry even comes into the picture. She was married to his older brother, Arthur, first.
Oh, that's right. And then Arthur dies pretty young, so they had to get special permission from the Pope, like a loophole, so she could marry Henry.
Exactly. It was called a papal dispensation. And at first, everything seems pretty good. Sources depict them as having genuine affection for each other. Seemed like a real partnership.
But then, yeah, that whole son thing starts to become a major problem. It wasn't just Henry being picky, right? This is about the stability of the entire country.
Oh, for sure. The Tudors were still relatively new to the throne. They remembered all the civil wars and battles over who would be king. Not having a clear male heir made everyone nervous.
So Henry starts to really stress about it, and he actually begins to question whether his marriage to Catherine is even legit. He starts using these religious arguments, saying that because she was married to his brother first, it's wrong in the eyes of God.
Right. He was pointing to specific passages in the Bible to make his case. And he goes straight to the top, petitions the Pope himself for an annulment. Basically like, can you just say this marriage never happened?
And the Pope's response is, nope.
Hard no. And this is where things get really interesting. See, Catherine's nephew was Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, a hugely powerful figure. He basically pressured the Pope to say no. And this sets off a chain reaction. Henry decides, fine, if the Pope won't play ball, I'll make my own rules.
Enter the English Reformation.
Boom, that's exactly it. Henry breaks away from the Catholic Church and declares himself the head of a new Church of England. It was a power move, plain and simple. But it totally transformed England's religious and political landscape.
So I've got this huge historical shift happening. But what about Catherine? She wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Catherine was incredibly strong-willed. She fought tooth and nail to remain queen. Her argument was that her marriage to Arthur was never actually consummated, which meant, according to church law, her marriage to Henry was perfectly valid.
So it was basically a he said, she said situation, but with incredibly high stakes.
Right. And think about the pressure she was under. Public scrutiny, political maneuvering, threats. But she stood firm. Even when Henry separated from her and basically forced her into exile, she insisted, until she died, that she was the rightful queen.
Your sources paint a picture of this whole annulment ordeal, causing massive ripples, and not just within England.
It was a huge deal. The Pope's refusal split the English court, with people choosing sides between Catherine and Henry, and it created this massive division within the Catholic Church itself. Like, we're talking a major fracture in the religious world.
And then there's the whole Anne Boleyn factor. She was a lady in waiting to Catherine, but very different. Much more, I don't know, fiery maybe.
Yeah, Anne was smart, charming, witty, and she definitely caught Henry's eye. Historians suggest he was totally smitten with her.
And it seems like he really wanted to marry her, not just, have her as a mistress.
And that's a key point. Anne wasn't interested in being just a royal fling. She wanted it all. And this ambition of hers, combined with Henry's desire, really pushed him to find a way out of his marriage to Catherine.
So this is where things get even more like, wait, what? Henry marries Anne, and it's this marriage that really makes the English Reformation stick.
It's the nail in the coffin, so to speak. 1533, the Archbishop of Canterbury goes against the Pope and grants the annulment. Henry and Anne get married. It's a huge middle finger to Rome, and it really sets the stage for the Church of England to become the dominant force in the country.
But then guess what? The pressure for a male heir is back. Anne gives birth to Elizabeth, a daughter, and Henry is, well, let's just say he's not thrilled.
You can imagine the disappointment. I mean, Elizabeth later goes on to become one of England's most iconic rulers, Queen Elizabeth I.
Yeah.
But at this point, all Henry can see is that he still doesn't have a son. The pressure on Anne is immense. Every time she gets pregnant, it's like the whole kingdom is holding its breath, waiting for a prince.
And then tragedy strikes. 1536, Anne miscarries a male child, and it's like a switch flips. This is where things really start to go downhill for her.
Yeah, losing that potential heir was a major turning point. It seems to change Henry's entire attitude towards Anne. Suddenly, all these rumors that have been swirling around about her, adultery, incest, even treason, they start to gain traction.
And it's pretty clear from the sources that these accusations were flimsy at best, like they didn't have any real proof.
Exactly. Most historians now believe that Henry, possibly infatuated with Jane Seymour already, basically manufactured these charges to get rid of Anne.
Yeah.
He needed a new wife, one who could potentially give him that son.
So what happens? Anne is executed, beheaded, in 1536. Just like that.
It sent shockwaves through England and all of Europe.
Yeah.
A queen put to death, based on what appeared to be totally made-up charges. Talk about a ruthless power move.
It's just brutal, and it really shows how far Henry was willing to go to get what he wanted.
Right. It really solidified his image as this kind of tyrant, willing to dispose of anyone who stood in his way. Plus, it clears the path for him to marry Jane Seymour, which is what he wanted all along.
Okay, so on to wife number 3, Jane Seymour. She's usually portrayed as this quiet, submissive type, the total opposite of Anne, and she's the one who finally gives Henry his son, Edward VI.
She does. In 1537, Edward is born. Jane achieves what seemed almost impossible, and she secures her place in history as the woman who gave Henry his longed-for heir. And you're right, she is often described as more traditional, more reserved. Maybe that was a deliberate strategy after the chaos of Anne's reign.
But there's a real sadness to her story, too. She dies just a few days after giving birth.
It's heartbreaking. You can only imagine the mix of emotions Henry must have felt. Joy at finally having his son, but then grief at losing his wife so soon after. Some historians even suggest that he carried a sense of guilt, knowing how much pressure she had been under to produce that heir.
And when you look deeper into Jane's story, there's this sense of her being manipulated, almost used, because of Henry's obsession with having a son.
Yet you can't ignore the power dynamics at play here. Jane was trapped in this system where her worth was basically tied to her ability to give Henry a male heir. Even if she wasn't as politically ambitious as some of the other wives, her fate was still determined by this one thing. And tragically, her death so soon after Edward's birth throws everything back into uncertainty. The dynasty is vulnerable again, even with a son, because, well, Henry's track record isn't exactly reassuring at this point.
Okay, so now we get to Anne of Cleves, wife number 4. This one was a purely political marriage. Henry's advisors thought marrying a German princess would be a good strategic move.
Right, and it's almost comical how badly it went. The story goes that when Henry met Anne, he was totally put off. Apparently, she looked nothing like her portrait.
Talk about awkward first impressions.
Right, and so the marriage was never even consummated. And after just 6 months, they get an annulment. Can you imagine the gossip that must have caused?
Oh, I bet the whole court was buzzing. But what's really interesting is what happens to Anne after this whole debacle. She doesn't end up like Catherine or Anne Boleyn.
Nope. Anne survives. Not only does she survive, but she actually stays on good terms with Henry. He gives her a nice pile of money, some land, and they basically become friends. Like he calls her his sister. It's a pretty wild turn of events.
It's so different from the other stories. Like there's this whole other layer to Anne of Cleves. It shows how navigating Henry's world wasn't just about avoiding disaster. It was also about playing the game even after you'd lost.
Exactly. She was smart about it, didn't hold a grudge, made the best of a bad situation, and it worked out pretty well for her in the end. She got to live a pretty comfortable life in England.
Okay, so we've got to talk about Catherine Howard, wife number 5. She was much younger than Henry, from a less powerful family. It seems like he was looking for something different this time, maybe a bit more fun, after the whole political mess with Anne of Cleves.
You could say that. After the failed political marriage, Catherine Howard probably represented something more personally appealing to Henry. Her youthfulness, her energy, it must have been a breath of fresh air for the aging king.
But, surprise, surprise, scandal strikes again. This time, it's accusations of affairs, both before and after she married Henry.
Yeah, this one comes out pretty quickly, just a couple of years into the marriage. These rumors of infidelity surface, and it's all downhill from there.
And it happens fast. Accusations, arrest, trial, execution, all in the span of like, what, a year? She was only 19 years old?
It's another tragic ending.
Mm-hmm.
And it really shows just how precarious life was at Henry's queen. Any hint of impropriety, any perceived threat to his ego or his power, and you're in serious trouble.
Your sources suggest that there might have been some truth to the accusations against Catherine Howard, but also maybe some exaggeration, some people using the situation to their advantage.
It's definitely possible that Catherine, being so young, made some, let's say, unwise choices. But it's also likely that her enemies at court used this to get rid of her. And let's not forget, Henry at this point is paranoid. He's been betrayed before. He's not inclined to give anyone the benefit of the doubt.
And so Catherine Howard becomes another victim of Henry's ruthlessness.
It's a pattern that's hard to ignore. The man was clearly capable of great cruelty, especially when he felt threatened or insecure.
All right, last but not least, Catherine Parr, wife number 6. She'd already been married twice before, so she was older, more experienced. It seems like she brought a sense of calm to Henry's later years when his health was failing.
Catherine Parr was a very different kind of wife for Henry. She was more like a partner, a caretaker. Her maturity and experience probably helped to stabilize things in the court, especially as Henry became more difficult to deal with.
But even she wasn't immune to scandal. She gets caught up in some religious drama, accused of having Protestant sympathies.
Right, this was a time of huge religious upheaval in England. Henry had broken from the Catholic Church, but there was still a lot of debate about how far the reforms should go. Catherine was known to be more sympathetic to the Protestant side, and this made her enemies.
And there's actually a point where she's in real danger of being executed. Like, Henry almost sends her to the chopping block, too.
It's crazy to think about. But it shows how powerful these religious tensions were. And it also shows that Catherine, despite her position as queen, wasn't untouchable.
But she survives. She manages to talk her way out of it, and she outlives Henry.
She does. She was the only one of Henry's wives to outlive him. And what's fascinating is that after his death, she goes on to marry again. Her story doesn't end with Henry. She gets a whole other chapter.
So when we look at the whole picture, at all 6 of these women, it's like this massive tapestry of scandal, politics, and just like the human cost of Henry's ambition.
That's a great way to put it. These weren't just royal weddings. They were major events that shaped the course of English history. Each wife played a part, whether she intended to or not.
And they weren't just pawns in this game either. These women were strong, resilient. They had their own beliefs, their own desires. Even within the constraints of the time, they made their mark.
Absolutely. Their stories show us the power of individuals, even in the face of overwhelming circumstances. And they give us this incredible insight into the Tudor world, into the mind of Henry VIII, and into the forces that shaped England during this pivotal period.
So for everyone listening, as you think about Henry VIII and his 6 wives, I want you to consider this. What do you think was the single biggest factor that influenced how these marriages played out? What was the driving force behind all this drama, all this change?
It's a question that really makes you think. Was it Henry's lust for power, his desperate need for a male heir, the religious turmoil of the time, or maybe something else entirely?
What do you think?